Us on the Wednesday class that shall not be named. Again, welcome to everyone joining us on the Wednesday class that shall not be named. I'm never exactly sure when the YouTube thing starts. So we're here today with Genevieve and Gail, Ron, Arlene, and Flossie and David, Michael, and myself. Gail, what state are you in again? What state? I lost you for a second. That's okay. You can put it in the chat. So we have people from multiple states
Where's
and
Gail
multiple
from?
countries. Huh?
Where's Gail from?
I don't know where she is right now. I don't know where
South
she's from
Carolina.
originally. She's in South Carolina, but I don't know where. Are you in South Carolina now? So she is in South Carolina. Okay, she's there. Okay, I thought she was somewhere else. All right. We've got 2 states and 2 countries represented. So thrilled, and we had a great session last time, and we wanted to continue it, which was wonderful. So we talked a little bit about the relationship between American presidents and the Jewish community, and we really highlighted the good things. I know there's a lot of negative things. We sometimes need to take relationships in context. We can't expect presidents in the early 19th century to look at the Jewish community as presidents in the modern age do. We have to look at how they treated the Jewish community in comparison to how the Jewish community was treated worldwide in terms of America. And I think what we've seen so far is even though some of the presidents had negative attitudes at times towards the Jewish community, said things that weren't very supportive, in general, almost every single president was good for the Jewish community in some way or another. Obviously, some, died right away, canon, but we really see a lot of support, especially in comparison to the rest of the world. In some cases, the presidents are so far ahead of the rest of the world in the way they treat the Jewish community. Others, they're just a little bit better, but generally speaking, we've seen they've treated, there's 1 or 2 that maybe not, but for the most part, we're talking about treating us very well. And it's been a real asset to us because sometimes they do it because of politics, which is amazing. Why is that amazing? Because there's so few of us. So we think of politics, but is it politically advantageous? Do they need our votes? In very small cases, possibly. In years that Ohio and Florida were swing states, maybe. But in general, our votes don't have the same impact as they do on the local level or on the county level, maybe even as much as the state level. So it's been really impressive. A lot of it does have to do with Israel in the modern age. A lot of it has to do with presidents who supported the idea of Israel at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. So we'll go and continue on. We may overlap just a few we saw last time. So we really got into the 20th century last time, and we'll go just back and review a little bit. We talked a lot about, of course, one of the biggest friends of the Jewish community obviously was Abraham Lincoln because he grew up with Jewish friends, which was unique. William McKinley, who was president 1897, was reelected, died in office the second time. Again, his whole cabinet and him were there when they laid the cornerstone for Washington Hebrew Congregation. Theodore Roosevelt appointed the first Jew to the cabinet as Secretary of Commerce, donated his own money to the National Jewish Welfare Board when he won the Nobel Prize, which says a lot when you give your own funds. Taft, who most famously Jewishly was the first president, I believe, to throw out the ceremonial first pitch at a baseball game. That has nothing to do about Judaism, but I just happen to know that piece of trivia for no apparent reason at all. And since all Jews we know love baseball, and this goes way back to the time of David. I think it was apropos. William Taft, famously first president to attend a Passover Seder. He spoke from a synagogue, not the first to speak at a synagogue, the first to speak during a Saturday morning service. And of course, he was the first to appoint a high-ranking Jew to the military. There have been high-ranking Jews, but this was an appointment from the president, Navy Rear Admiral. Woodrow Wilson, maybe one of the most famous moments when he appointed Louis Brandeis to be the first Jewish Supreme Court justice. Obviously, as we mentioned earlier, it was not the first president to want to appoint a U.S. Supreme Court, just a Jew to the Supreme Court. Millard Fillmore wanted to do that with Judah B. Benjamin in the 1850s, early 1850s, but Judah B. Benjamin turned it down. He didn't think it was advantageous to him. Obviously, he would become Secretary of State, and he had another position during the Civil War with the Confederacy. Again, the only man in the Confederacy who left the country after the Civil War, never came back. President Wilson was also a very big supporter of the United Jewish Relief Campaign to help Jews after World War I. He supported the Balfour Declaration. Was really good friends with Stephen Wise, who was probably the most prominent American Jewish rabbi at the time. And he put a man to serve as vice chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, which had just been created. So the first vice chairman of the Federal Reserve was a Jewish man. So he did a lot too. He would be up there in the top 5, top 10. So those are ones we mentioned last week. Obviously, we've had some very famous presidents. Some are not as famous. We're now going to go to the 1920s, where the presidents are not as famous until Herbert Hoover, because he's famous because we all know why Herbert Hoover is famous. Because he's in a song in the opening to All in the Family. So that's why he's famous, if you didn't realize that. I guess we don't have All in the Family fans here. A great show. You should definitely watch it.
Yeah, right.
I forgot.
If you haven't ever seen, you can look it on YouTube. It's one of the funniest Jewish comedy bits of all time. When Archie Bunker goes to his friend's funeral, he doesn't realize he's one of his best friends. He didn't realize was Jewish. And he goes to the funeral and he has to give a eulogy. It is, please be sitting down when you watch that episode, because you'll fall over laughing and you may hurt yourself. And make sure if you're asthmatic, take your preventative asthma medicine, because it is that funny. I can watch that episode over and over and I never watched Archie Bunker growing up because I was too young. I don't think my parents watched it. They probably thought I was too young for it, but man, that episode. So let's go to the presidents during the Roaring '20s. Of course, Warren Harding, who would also die. Every president that's born in 20, 40, 60, or 0 died in office up until Reagan and Bush, right? And so Reagan and Bush, or Reagan and Bush. So Warren Harding did die in office, but he did support the Balfour Declaration. Even signed a congregational resolution. Again, the Balfour Declaration was in England, so supporting it meant absolutely nothing, but it was nice to show support because it didn't go anywhere. He also advocated in other places for Jews to have a homeland there. So he also liked to send Rosh Hashanah greetings to the Jewish communities. So he would send that out via telegraph to all the Jewish communities, which was really nice. So he was actually, although didn't do as much for the Jewish community, was very popular with the Jewish community. Him, I think, and Kennedy, and maybe Truman, and of course FDR, very popular with the Jewish community. Now we come to, of course, Calvin Coolidge, who served Warren Harding's last term, the end of it, and then his own. And of course, we know he would be the president of the very end of the Roaring Twenties, because he finished his in 1929. And he helped to dedicate the Washington, D.C. Jewish Community Center. And so, and he also, although I found something a little less, these are the words he said: the Jewish faith is predominantly the faith of liberty. From the beginnings of the conflict between the colonies, the mother country, they were overwhelmingly on the side of this rising revolution. He also sent a congratulatory note to the two people who beat Charles Lindbergh's record for the transatlantic plane flight. So of course, Charles Lindbergh is very famous for winning the transatlantic. Very soon afterwards, another flight beat the record. Nobody ever is remembered for the second flight. He congratulated the Jewish person and the other person who beat Charles Lindbergh's record, which was also important because Charles Lindbergh was somebody who was not very supportive of the Jewish community. And he even said it was a great Jewish feat, although he wasn't known to be very supportive generally of the Jewish community. He did that. So,
what's his name, Rabbi?
Calvin Coolidge.
No, the Jewish man.
Oh, sorry, Charles A. Levine. It was hard to find
Charles
stuff.
A. Levine.
Yeah, Calvin Coolidge. It wasn't easy to find some stuff that he did, but again, Levine was not the pilot; he was the passenger, but he was on the flight. So, again, if he had been the passenger and they beat Charles Lindbergh, they would have had a parade during, and what's the square time? What square do they do the parades in New York City? Is it Times Square? Or do they do it?
Well, they do it down Wall Street.
Wall Street.
Canyon of the Heroes, they call it.
He would have been on that parade. Now, Herbert Hoover is not considered a great president from any stretch of the imagination, but he was very supportive of the Jewish community. He appointed a number of Jews to posts and was very supportive of the idea of a Jewish country in Palestine. He, after his presidency, tried to convince FDR to let Jewish children escaping Germany to come into the country, which he did not, I believe, do, but he was very supportive even afterwards of trying to help Jews escaping the war. And so even though he wasn't considered a great president, he seems to have been pretty supportive of the Jewish community in that way. A lot of them are very supportive. It's funny because it seems like there are more American presidents that were supportive of the Balfour Declaration than a lot of the Jewish community in the early years. Now we come to FDR. And FDR is a very difficult one because obviously he is one of the greatest presidents of all time, the longest serving president. He was very popular with the Jewish community, very popular. Even with the detractors. Ron.
Yeah, FDR was very supportive of the Jewish communities because a lot of credit has to go to Eleanor.
Right.
She was very involved with the Jewish. In fact, we have here a picture of Eleanor in the middle selling Israeli buns in Paterson, New Jersey in 1954.
Yeah, so I mean, and there, again, it's another one that you have to look at in context. Again, he became well known later for saying some anti-Jewish things, but again, a lot of presidents did that because that was the vernacular of the time. But he was very much someone who spoke out against Nazi Germany when Hitler was of course, setting up everything he did. His wife and him were overtly very supportive of the Jewish community. But again, he was at a very difficult time. There was a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment, anti-Catholic sentiment, anti-Black sentiment during this time. He was not an anti-Semite, spoke out against the poison of anti-Semitism. But a lot of it is also known because the State Department was not very supportive of the Jewish community, although he was not against it. But again, he was very limited. You know, he gets a lot of negative publicity for not bombing the trains taking Jews to the crematoriums, to the camps. But he gets a lot of flack for not entering into World War II earlier and stopping Hitler. But you know, we tend to think of presidents as being all powerful, and he being a 4-term president, although he didn't serve all 4 terms, as being the most powerful president of all time. That is not the case. America was very divided in the 1930s and 40s. The Depression had raged, and whenever there are dark times in the country, we know there's a rise in racism and anti-everything else. And anti-Semitism was the issues. A lot of the country did not want to go into the war, including a lot of his party. He had to be very careful of showing preference to anybody during the war, showing preference to the Jewish community during a war when we didn't know if we were going to win or lose. Some of the decisive acts he did perpetrate, such as interning Japanese Americans, which became even more stigma, he did because, not necessarily because he wanted to, but because politically he felt he had to win the election. So again, was he good for the Jews? Absolutely. Were there some negatives? Of course. He's a long-term president who served during the Depression and during World War II. So he served during 2 of the most trying times in American history. So did he allow Jewish refugees to come in? He did allow some, but they did keep the limitations. But again, it wasn't as if it was his decision. It was a political decision. Could have he stood up more? Sure, probably. But again, it's hard to compare. We know probably the most famous Americans, you know, at the time when this is happening were, of course, Henry Ford and Charles Lindbergh. So Henry Ford and Charles Lindbergh, which were the richest, one of the richest men in America and one of the most famous men in America, were both ardent anti-Semitites. There was a lot of talk about Lindbergh running for president. There's a whole book, I don't know if he won the Pulitzer, The Plot Against America, Philip Roth wrote on the problems. So it was a tight moment for the Jews in America. There was a lot of, you know, stepping lightly during this period. And so FDR had to be very careful not to be someone who rocked the boat too much and then lost his presidency, and then who knows what would happen to the world. So he was a great man. He had flaws like everybody else, but he was a good president for the Jews. And if other presidents had won, I think it could have been traumatic for us during these periods. So again, his Truman, who came afterwards, was probably not a very supportive. He was very famous because he did not like talking to the Jewish community, because he was getting so many visits and calls. This is after everybody finds out the Holocaust. There are Jews calling him all the time, bring Jews here, support Israel. It was a lot. And of course, the Jewish community was completely shocked. We had no idea the level of what had been happening. It was all rumors. And so he was inundated. He was not as powerful as FDR. He was given a State Department that was not very supportive of the Jewish community, especially the idea of Israel. And so even though he complained about the American Zionists being selfish, he did one of the most important things any president's ever done, and that was help ensure the UN vote passed, which it would not have passed without him. Ensured that Israel was recognized. He was the first president, 11 minutes after, I don't know how he heard so quickly back then, but 11 minutes after Ben-Gurion announced the state, he was the first world leader to call Ben-Gurion and recognize the state. So just on that alone, and plus the fact that he had good friends growing up who were Jewish, again, like Eddie Jacobson, again, the famous guy he was in the schmata business with Eddie Jacobson. So he knew other Jews. So again, someone who sometimes gets some negative connotation, but because of that one act, which he did defy the State Department and did defy a lot of his supporters. And remember, when this is 1947. He's got an election coming up, and he is not the favorite to win the election. We all remember him holding up, I think was the Chicago Tribune, or was it the
Yes.
Sun Times?
No, it was the Tribune.
The Tribune,
Yeah.
Dewey wins. So he was much even more worried about, again, obviously FDR was in more dire times. If FDR had lost, who knows what would have happened. Truman, the war's over, but he really probably was not the favorite. I think, it's the only time in American history where you've had, four times in a row, you had the same party. Now, Gail is bringing up the ship not allowing Jews to come into America, and that is they were talking about FDR. That is a big point, because that is another area where he was given negative connotation, a negative press in the Jewish community. We also mentioned Herbert Hoover was pressing him to allow them in. Was he hateful of Jews? No, I doubt it. It was more that this was a very big political issue. It had to do with the timing, and it also had to do with he promised that we would not enter the war. That was one of his campaign slogans, that we would not enter this war. And he was running for election in 1940. Oh, Michael, I'm sorry, I'll go to you.
No, that's fine. I mean, he campaigned on that, but we basically were already in the war through Lend-Lease.
Right, exactly.
But what I was going to say was, and this is, it's really very, I think, relevant to what you were talking about, is the State Department, and I don't know if anybody has, but I would hope somebody would at some point. The State Department traditionally was very anti-Semitic, and you can go back, to 1900 and probably through the early 1950s. The State Department was not going to do anything for Jews, and it's like no president or Secretary of State could control what the bureaucrats in the State Department did, and that's that made it very difficult for the presidents.
And also, that's exactly right. And we think that the president, appoints his own cabinet. That is true. However, there's a lot of politics involved, and it's favors and who did what and who supports you, who's capable. And then that cabinet person decides his own staff. So, that's, I think, exactly right. The refugee vote came in the late 30s. He was running for election in 1940. We were selling stuff to England, which some people didn't like, but of course it brought a lot of money. So a lot of people didn't mind it because it was getting our factories going, but nobody wanted to enter the war. I mean, some people did, but if he had ran as somebody who wanted to enter the war, I don't think he thought he would win. And again, I don't know, but again, history probably says he wouldn't have. So he had to be very careful not to be someone seen to be trying to enter the war. There's even rumors that they had an inkling at what was going to happen at Pearl Harbor. General MacArthur, who was, as at the time, considered a great general, as history has not been kind, probably rightly so, to General MacArthur, but he apparently set up, however Pearl Harbor was set up, was like the easiest way for an attack. Like all the planes were in place, everybody. So that could be, like there's no man on the moon. That could be, we didn't go to the moon. That could be, but again, there was a lot of politics in this period. And again, anytime there are difficult moments in history, usually anti-Semitism goes to the forefront. That wasn't necessarily the case as much in World War II because so many Jews served in the war, but certainly during the Depression. Now, after...
This blows my mind because as I've been thinking about this, you guys know this, but the Jews were literally here in 1733. Right? So who's freaking could be more American if you were literally here before America even formed?
And you're exactly right. And that is a good point. But again,
Very good, very good.
Yep. But the problem is hate doesn't make sense. And anytime they're difficult time. Now, it wasn't just the Jews. I mean, obviously, it was difficult being Jews as we tread on, we tread lightly in the 1930s, but what about being African American? Catholics, there was a lot of Catholic feelings still in America. Women had been given the right to vote in 1920, but you didn't see that many women in Congress or as mayors or even on city councils. So there were still a lot of other, I come from South Texas. A very high percentage of the population was Latino, but they weren't on the city council or running. They weren't allowed in the public pools. So there were, so there's always going to be hate and prejudice, unfortunately. Dwight D. Eisenhower, of course, did one of the greatest favors to the Jewish community of all time, not only as president, but as the five-star general, the first five-star general since Washington, the general in charge of the Allied forces, the man who led D-Day, because when he saw the camps, what did he famously say? And I don't have the quotes here. I forgot to copy the quotes, but he basically saw the camps, and the first thing that came to mind, besides how horrible it was, they're going to deny this in the future. That's the first thing. So he brought in reporters and photographers, and he probably very difficult for them to take pictures of all of this, but he made them take pictures of everything and video of everything. He made the people who were living right next to the camps to walk through and see, not to be mean, but to make sure that people saw what, and my goodness, how could someone in 1945 be so right about the future? How did he know that Holocaust denial would become such an important part of the anti-Semitic world? Flossie.
I think he also made a comment about him being German and how it bothered him.
It could be. I don't know that comment, but that sounds right.
This is why I would, when I homeschooled the kids, I mean, obviously I wouldn't show them stuff super graphic, but some people would be like, why will you like let them see things about like slaves being whipped or whatever? And I'm like, because I want them to see what they had to go through to create empathy.
Yeah. And again, empathy is a good point there. Again, it has to do the same thing with slaves and Catholics and women and Latinos. If you dehumanize somebody, you can do anything to them. The Nazis took it to the extreme, obviously, others have, but even on a regular level, politically, business-wise, if you dehumanize somebody, you can explain why you're doing something. So he appointed Lewis L. Strauss as chairman of the new Atomic Energy Commission. I think Strauss wasn't he? I forgot to look this up. I think Strauss wasn't he in the movie? I think he was uh, the enemy of Oppenheimer. Wasn't he the one?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, and
Right.
it's not a very sympathetic portrayal of
No,
Strauss
and
at all.
again, it's a movie. It's a movie. He had some falling out with Oppenheimer, and so that in the movie, he is the one who basically blackballs Oppenheimer and destroys
Right.
his image. Is that true? Certainly, some of it is. It is true that he lost his appointment, as I'm looking up right now, lost his appointment to, what was the name of the cabinet position?
The Atomic Energy Commission.
He was going to be given a cabinet position and it was taken away. But I mean, I can't remember looking it up. Sorry, I couldn't find it. But
Value
sorry.
and integrity. The home.
Sorry, I was looking it up and I got a commercial.
Sadly, I haven't been able to
I
see the
cannot
movie
find
yet.
what was the
'cause-
name cabinet appointment? What was the cabinet appointment he was doing? He was supposed to get. Anybody remember? Okay, sorry, I put on.
Sadly, I haven't been able to see the movie yet.
Okay,
It's a good movie. It's on.
okay, I'm looking it up, trying to find the cabinet appointment, but it keeps straight. Sorry, anybody remember? It's a great movie. So I'm looking it up. Sorry, I can't remember. Sorry about that. I should have looked it up before. Appointment, Secretary of Commerce. Thank you. I couldn't believe I couldn't remember that. Yeah, so he was up for a big appointment for Secretary of Commerce, and he lost that appointment, and a lot had to do with his treatment of Oppenheimer. So he helped to destroy Oppenheimer, which is funny because they were both Jewish guys, and they would have been friends. Oppenheimer could be snarky, and he was, and he did some things to really upset Strauss, who took it to a different level. So the movie makes Strauss look like the complete bad guy, but we also know that generally not one person is completely the bad guy. There are exceptions. But if you haven't seen, how many of you have not seen the movie though, by the way? The movie was fabulous. It was really, I thought, an incredible movie. Robert Downey Jr. Played Strauss and won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. I don't see that many movies anymore, but that was certainly one of the best ones I saw for the year. So that was a really good one. So, so definitely very supportive of the Jewish community, helped celebrate the 300th anniversary of the first Jews arriving officially. So again, very popular in the Jewish community, which says a lot about the Jewish community because obviously he was a Republican, FDR was a Democrat. The next president is going to be a Democrat, and he's going to be very popular in the Jewish community as well. So it's great that the Jewish community have been supportive. John F. Kennedy, as we know, is the next president. And he was probably the first rock star president. First president during the age of TV. Obviously, TV existed when Truman was elected and when Eisenhower was elected, but really the late 50s is when it's really hitting its stride. And really, he won the election possibly in no small part because of his debate with Nixon, in which Nixon looked terrible during the debate. Kennedy had makeup on, he's young, he's good looking. Nixon's sweating. He didn't, account for the importance of the cameras, which of course he learned from his mistake when he ran in 68. But Kennedy barely won that election. Barely. I think he lost the vote, lost the popular vote. Flossie.
Kennedy had the problem being Catholic. And I
Right.
remember
And that was
the Pope's
Right.
going to control him, and a lot of issues came up around that.
exactly
point.
Flossie. And not only that, you had to probably be that good looking and that charismatic to win as a Catholic. He's the first Catholic president. He's the first president who wasn't Protestant. We still haven't had a Jewish one yet, but we've had There was another Catholic president, wasn't there? Who else is Catholic? Anybody?
Well, Biden,
Is Biden Catholic? Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I should probably remember that. My bad. I don't remember. Anyway, he nominated as Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. Was a friend of Israel. Very close with Golda Meir. And really very popular in the Jewish world. He was, even a synagogue was renamed after him after he died. Little known fact, which I looked up, which was 1 year during Passover, Israel didn't have enough wheat. And so he went out of his way to make sure Israel got enough wheat to make matzah for Passover.
Wow. That's
Thought that was
interesting.
very cute. So very popular president. Many of you, some of you may have been alive during the Eisenhower and Kennedy presidency, so you would know more. But Kennedy was just very glamorous. It was really like, presidential wives had always been essential since probably Abigail Adams, especially, and obviously Eleanor Roosevelt may have been the most important. But Jackie Kennedy was a whole new level. She was a Vogue, superstar actress, A-list, and he was. So they were, magical couple. We know all the negatives we know today, but very popular and was very supportive of the Jewish community. Now, Lyndon B. Johnson was in many respects the opposite of Kennedy. He was not good looking, was not really as great in front of the cameras, was kind of dour, tall, intimidating, was a Texan as opposed to, an East Coaster, but very, very supportive of the Jewish community. Many people don't know this, but as a new congressman, he helped Jews escape Germany into the port of Galveston.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a little known fact that I just found out in recent years, and you can look it up. He was very supportive of the Jewish community, very supportive of the African American community, even though he's from Texas. The civil rights legislation was mostly his ideas, trying to press it on Kennedy. So when Kennedy died, what did he do? He used the popularity and the fact that Kennedy had just died to get all of this civil rights legislation passed, knowing that he famously said, "I've lost the South for the Democrats." So he basically knew the South, he would lose the South, still did it, was probably the greatest presidential legislator in history, as he was one of the all-time great legislators in Congress as a congressman and senator. He helped supply false passports and visas personally and saved 400 Eastern European Jews in the 1930s. And he was he's a small town congressman from Texas, and he's doing this. So obviously, if it wasn't for Vietnam, which is a big if it wasn't, he would be on the next Mount Rushmore with FDR. I mean, he did more for this country than almost any president, positively when he terms domestically, one of the greatest, if not the greatest president, and of course internationally, in many respects, one of the worst. But of course, he was a product of his age, and the mere idea that we could lose Vietnam was something that most Americans, while he was president, just couldn't even fathom. It was beyond question that we would stay there. And it wasn't until the end of his presidency, when the movement came, that he lost his popularity. He was pretty popular, Obviously, he ended up being a very unpopular president because of Vietnam, but he was a person of his age. And all the staunch people in his party and all the people who are older like him all looked at the war the same way. We have to win to stop Russia, to stop China, sorry. So, unfortunately for him, he could not overcome his viewpoint. I bet if he had been president 2 more years, he would have eventually, but he stepped down as president not because he thought he was going to lose the election. I think he stepped down because losing an election is not something that's going to tarnish your reputation forever. I think he stepped down because he thought he was going to lose the primary. And a president losing a primary, that is a huge deal. That is, I don't know if has rarely happened in US history. And so that could have been just completely destroyed his legacy. The next president is, we'll talk about it just a little bit because we went into Nixon a lot more in depth. A man who said a lot of anti-Semitic things, very close with Henry Kissinger, who was Jewish, but of course there were a lot of issues publicly with him, no matter how brilliant he was. But we know he made Henry Kissinger the first Jewish Secretary of State, which is the highest position in the country that a president can appoint anybody to. And that was a big deal. And most importantly, despite his anti-Semitic rhetoric, which we know now from his tapes, presidents nowadays are more apt to be a little bit controlled when they speak, knowing they're being recorded. But this was before that time period. And so he said a lot of anti-Semitic slurs. But when Israel needed help, he is the man who stepped up. He is the man who gave $2.2 billion of aid and dropped crucial weaponry when Israel dropped the ball themselves and were threatened to lose the Yom Kippur War. And he did it like that in like right away. I mean, in days, Israel had the weapons. So, and that one thing, from our perspective, we know what a kind of, yes, Flossie.
With the war with Israel, I know because Jeff kept calling up McGuire.
Wait, before we go to this, Flossie, why don't you give us, we mentioned it before, but why don't you give us the details of what your husband did?
Well, what I was going to say, Rabbi, is when Jeff kept calling up McGuire to volunteer to bring weapons in through the military, they kept saying, wait, we're not getting permission. We're not getting permission. And I know for a fact that what was holding it up was not Nixon, was Kissinger. And he did not want to show being too Jewish. And he was the one who went and had a stop on it. And finally, Jeff got permission. Colonel, come to the base. We're going over.
So what she's saying is Jeff, her husband, God rest his soul and remember his memory, honor his memory, was one of the pilots who dropped the equipment for Israel during this period. He was so if you didn't know that, we mentioned it last time. Flossie was not here when we talked about Nixon. We talked about this. So, and it is very ironic, but understandable. Throughout history, Jews have risen to great positions. You think about, of course, in England, Israeli have often had to go out of their way to make themselves seem as not too controlled by the Jewish community, not too supportive of the Jewish community overtly. And that is what Kissinger did at that time. Again, but he was Jewish. Nixon was not Jewish. He didn't have to worry about this. Nixon never had to worry about being called too supportive of the communists or too supportive of the Jews because the rhetoric he said behind the scenes. Ron.
Yeah, you mentioned Kennedy's. I have to tell you that Jackie Kennedy, she, when they were going to open the Kennedy Center, she asked Leonard Bernstein to create a, I forgot the word, but the music
Oh, wow. No, I,
for the opening of Kennedy Center. Also, it was Jackie Kennedy and the board of the Kennedy Center who picked a Jewish artist to create the program, and he had in mind that they only created enough for the people who attended to have a copy. Then she said she wanted the original, whatever they make it from, destroyed. And who was that Jewish artist? That was my uncle, Irving Spellins.
really? Did
Yeah.
not know that.
And we have
What was his last name? Ron, what was his last name?
Spellins.
Irvin Spell. Why did she have the original destroyed? She didn't want it to be valuable?
She wanted to be part of the memorial, and she didn't want it to be copied over and over again. We have a copy of the original program
Wow.
in the Kennedy Center.
That is amazing. So we have a lot of cool connections here.
Oh, yeah. Between Flossie and us, we're famous.
I know you've.
Hey, Ron,
Yeah.
do you know who the sculptor was of that horrible bust of Kennedy? That's
No.
in the. Okay.
It wasn't his relative, don't
No,
worry.
it wasn't.
That is the worst bust I've ever seen of any person in a building named after him or her.
I don't remember the bust off to. I've only been there once. I went there for I had a Jewish conference, and then I left. I got lost going to the bathroom. Ended up just walking around the whole Kennedy area with nobody there by myself. I was like, this is a little weird. I'm walking around the Kennedy Center, and there's no guards here, and I'm just walking around because it was really. But I guess they don't let people in. But so very interesting. All right, so we only have a few minutes. So let's.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
And it's something I should know, but I have forgotten over time. But during the '56 war, Eisenhower, it was right before the election, maybe a week, 10 days before the '56 election, and
Yeah.
Israel, France, and England, went into the Sinai and together, and Eisenhower, made them retreat. And I wonder how that's affected his legacy among Jews. Probably not much, because you didn't mention it.
Yeah, again,
I've
that's
forgotten it all.
I should have mentioned that. You're right. I apologize. So let's go back and see what the world was. And in the 1930s and 20s, the most powerful country in the world was England. They controlled China, India, parts of Africa, of course, their own area, and they controlled a good portion of the world, had the most powerful navy, and they lost almost everything in World War II. They won World War II with our help, but they lost India, they lost the Middle East. They're going to lose in the 60s most of their African countries. They lose China. And in the 1950s, they lose Egypt, which is important for one very big reason, and that is because of the Suez Canal. So when Nasser, who was the president of Egypt at the time, not a nice man to say the least, nationalizes it, England and France ask Israel to do them a favor. Now, Israel didn't have a lot of friends, and certainly to have friends called England and France would be great, because let's remember, although America supported Israel, they weren't selling them weapons at this time. Israel was getting weapons wherever else they could. And so to have connections with France and England, that's a whole different level of connection. And the agreement was for Israel to go in, take the Suez Canal, using the excuse that they're going to limit Israeli trade. And then England and France would come in and stop them and negotiate with Israel and take back control. And of course, Eisenhower sees this and stops it. America by this time is the most powerful country in the world, and he stops them. There are a lot of other issues at stake at this time as to American support in the Middle East, the oil in the Middle East, Russia becoming the Soviet Union taking over some of these countries. So there are a lot of other issues at stake, and that's why he stopped it. If he looked back probably 5 years later, he probably would have thought it was a mistake. But at the time, so was it anti-Jewish? No, not really. I think it was completely political. So you're right, that was an issue. I don't think he had, he probably took a hit in the Jewish community, but it's not something that probably followed him. Because this was not a war in which Israel was attacked.
Right.
This is a war in Israel is, working with England and France to do something that Israel could. I mean, obviously, it was advantageous to Israel to have England and France in charge of that canal. But if, so that's what happened. Yeah. So that's a really good point.
Well, thanks. I mean, I have forgotten, 95% of the details of that. So that.
Yeah. And again, what was going through his mind? It was a quick impulse. He did it right away. And again, the world was a little different back then. So there was probably a lot of thoughts as to where were these Muslim countries going to have support. The Soviet Union didn't control the Middle East yet at this point. So any other thoughts? And again, what would happen in years later is, of course, America would become very closely tied with Egypt, but this would happen much later after the Camp David Accords. Any other questions or thoughts? So that's a little bit. We got up to Nixon. If you go to the Nixon Library, which I've been to, it's a lot smaller than probably the other ones. Probably didn't have the money, but they do a good job of being honest about him. Like that, you can listen to his tapes and hear some of the anti-Semitic things he said. Other presidents were probably saying very similar things. There was a lot of stereotypes about Jews. They're very honest about Watergate as well. So it's interesting. So next week, I guess we'll do one more week of the Jews and the presidents. Any other thoughts of things? And we'll talk about next week what we're going to do afterwards. Remember again, we're going to bring food and hang out. We're going to meet at Arlene and Ron's on August 14th. If anybody has, August 13th or August 20th. What day was it?
14th.
I'm in the wrong year. That's why I'm looking at the calendar and it's the wrong year. That's why I was like, why don't I have anything scheduled for that month? August 14th. If anybody has a house we can use to meet sometime in September, we're not going to do it October, but sometime in September, please let me know. So thank you guys. Again, have a wonderful week.
Friday at Wendy's.
Friday night, we're going to be at Wendy Elevix for our first exotic Shabbat. On Saturday, we have Sophia Center's bat mitzvah. We haven't had a bat mitzvah in a while, so it'll be amazing. And then, of course, we've got so many things coming up. So you guys stay safe. Have a great rest of the summer. And we'll see everybody next week on the Wednesday class that shall not be named.
Rabbi, what is the
Thank
time?
you.
What is the time at Wendy's?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. Okay.
Yeah, and you can go online to see what they need to have to bring, or you can just call.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi,
bringing-
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm bringing a hummus platter, just in case you're wondering. So,
I want to tell you that these 2 sessions so far have been so wonderful,
thank you, Ron. That's great.
very wonderful.
And I hope you enjoy the hummus platter my wife and I are bringing on
I'm
Friday.
sure we will.
Stay safe, guys.
Bye.
Everybody take good care. It's good
Thank
seeing
you.
everybody.
Good seeing everybody.
Bye.